The chamber smelled like pressed stone and recycled air. Not stale, not unpleasant. Just used, the particular flatness of air that has been breathed by too many species for too long, filtered and recirculated, until whatever made it distinct had been averaged out of it entirely. Marin Calith noticed this before she noticed anything else. Not the vote count, not the lowered tier, not the 4 empty seats beside her. The smell first. Then the rest. She had a habit of starting with the physical. She had developed it over 19 years in chambers like this one, the slow discipline of beginning with what was actually in front of you before you moved to what it meant. Other people walked into rooms and immediately saw the politics of them. Marin walked in and smelled the air and noted the light and felt the particular quality of the floor under her feet. And then she saw the politics. It was slower, it was also more accurate. The rest this morning was this. The Galactic Convocation had voted, by a margin of 3,901 to 3, to remove humanity from recognized trade and territorial infrastructure across the known governance zone. The resolution had been read aloud in full, 3 procedural citations, 40 minutes. A voice that carried no particular feeling about what it was saying because the voice belonged to a species for whom declarative speech was simply the transmission of information and feeling, was a separate act performed separately. The human delegation had been assigned to Tier 5, 2 levels below standard member floor, in a chamber built from pale composite stone with an open ceiling that let the light fall from the upper tiers in long pale columns down to the lower ones. Tier 5 caught the light last and least. Marin had noted this when she walked in and chosen a position at the railing where the angle was slightly better. The 4 adjacent seats were empty. 4 species had withdrawn their visible presence that morning. No explanation had been offered, no statement filed. They were simply absent, their tier positions bare, the nameplates removed and not replaced. Marin had noted this too. Convener Primus Thurval Ondexerath finished reading the final clause of the resolution, set his documents flat on the second-tier railing, and looked down at Tier 5. He was broad-shouldered, pale gray carapace running across his upper neck and shoulders, 2.1 meters tall. His 4-jointed fingers rested flat on the railing surface rather than curling around it. A physical habit that came, Marin had read, from a species whose grip reflex was not involuntary but deliberate. He carried no personal objects. He considered them procedurally irregular. He had presided over 9 charter-level resolutions in 22 years. None of them had been challenged. He offered the human delegation 4 minutes to respond. As a courtesy, he said. Marin set her folder flat on the Tier 5 railing. She uncapped her pen. She looked up at the second tier, at Ondexerath's flat hands and pale gray carapace, and the particular expression of someone who has concluded a matter and is now waiting for the conclusion to be acknowledged. She asked him a question instead. Before the question, before the folder, before the 4 minutes, before the 3,901 votes, and the 40 minutes of reading and the light falling in pale columns from the upper tiers, there was a building in Nairobi with no sign on it. The entrance was on a side street, staff only. The kind of door that read as a utility access if you weren't looking for it. And most people weren't, because most people had no reason to look for it. And the people who did know it was there had long since stopped seeing it as a door and had started seeing it as simply the way in. Inside, a sub-level research facility, 3 floors below ground, no windows. Ventilation that ran on a continuous cycle that had not been interrupted in 28 years, not once, not for maintenance, not for the 3 separate occasions on which the building's power grid had been rerouted for city infrastructure work. They had a backup and the backup had a backup because the one thing the program had decided in its first year was that the record would not go dark. The record. The program had one name internally, the Continuance Archive. Externally, it had no name because it had no external presence, no website, no letterhead, no registration in any directory of research institutions. If you looked for it, you would find the building, and if you found the building, you would find a door on a side street, and if you found the door, you had already found more than most people ever would. 190 specialists. That was the current count. It had been lower in the early years, 63 in year 1, building slowly as the program's funding stabilized and its scope became clear. It had peaked at 211 in year 19 and settled at 190 after the last restructuring, which Director Ondrath had managed the way he managed everything, by opening a new binder, writing new index tabs, and continuing. The disciplines: international law, xenolinguistics, economic dependency modeling, trade route infrastructure mapping, biological registry cross-referencing, historical document recovery, and one category that existed nowhere else in any human institution. A job title that had been invented specifically for this program and had never appeared on any public employment listing, in any language, anywhere. Treaty Archaeologist. The work was exactly what it sounded like. You took alien governance documents, founding compacts, ratification amendments, procedural annexes, supplementary protocols, footnotes to footnotes, and you excavated them. Not for secrets, not for intelligence in the conventional sense. You dug for load-bearing structures, clauses that had been written into the legal foundation of a civilization 2,000 years ago and then built over, generation by generation, institution by institution, until the civilization sitting on top of them had entirely forgotten that the foundation existed and had stopped checking whether it still held. The Vithrani conquered had been building for 60 years on a foundation 2,400 years deep. The Continuance Archive had been reading that foundation for 28. They had read every word of it. If you worked at the archive, there were 3 people you learned about quickly, not because anyone sat you down and told you about them, but because they were present in the texture of the place in ways that became visible once you knew what you were looking at. The first was Director Hess Andreth. He had been on the program since year 1. He was 61 now, and he looked like a person who had spent 28 years doing something he considered worth doing and had not spent much time worrying about anything else. He kept a second physical copy of every document the program had ever filed, not a digital backup, an actual copy, printed, in a physical binder with handwritten index tabs in his own handwriting, on a shelf that ran the full length of the wall behind his desk. The binders were arranged by year and within year by category and within category by filing date. And if you needed something and you could not find it in the digital system, you could ask Director Andreth, and he would go to the shelf without looking up and pull the right binder and open it to the right tab and hand you the page. He had never, in 28 years, sent a message longer than 1 sentence. His staff had learned to read a great deal into the sentences. The second was Dr. Usul Kareth. She was a xenolinguistic law specialist, which meant she did not translate words but intent, the procedural purpose embedded in the grammar and sequence of alien legal language across 11 conquered dialects. It was the kind of work that required you to hold 2 legal systems in your mind at once and find the places where they were describing the same concept in fundamentally incompatible ways. She was very good at it. Before she spoke in any formal setting, a meeting, a review, a session with visiting legal counsel, she tapped her left index finger twice on whatever surface was nearest. Always twice. Never once, never 3 times. She had never acknowledged this habit, and her staff had collectively decided, years ago, not to mention it. The third was Archivist Tavin Sorvan. He had spent 19 years cross-referencing 14,000 pages of pre-conquered galactic legal record, documents that predated the conquered itself, from the civilizations that had existed before the current governance structure, and had left their legal frameworks embedded, like geological layers, in the founding documents of the institutions that came after them. He had retired 2 years ago at the end of his 19th year. On the morning of the session, before the chamber opened, before the resolution was read aloud, someone had sent him a copy of the public filing. No message had accompanied it. He had the context. There was a 4th person you learned about eventually, if you stayed long enough and paid the right kind of attention. Dr. Vale Corhen was not present. She had died 9 years before today, in the 11th year of the program, from an illness that had nothing to do with the work. She had been 73 when she joined the archive and 73 when she made the discovery that mattered and 82 when she died. And she had not slowed down in any of those years in any way that anyone who worked alongside her could detect. In year 4 of the program, her 4th year, she had found something. Not in the body of the Thessan founding compact, not in its annexes, not in the supplementary protocols that had been added over the first 5 centuries after ratification. In a footnote to a ratification amendment, a footnote that the archive's own cataloging system had flagged as non-substantive, that the researcher who first processed it had noted and moved past, that had been sitting in the indexed record for 4 years without anyone stopping to look at it closely. Dr. Corhen had stopped. She had printed it. She had taped it to the wall above her desk, not pinned, taped, because she wanted it flat against the surface, wanted to be able to stand directly in front of it and read it without any angle of view. And then she had spent the next 7 years building the verification chain that proved it meant exactly what she thought it meant. She called it the floor. Article 3, Subprovision 9 of the Thessan Founding Compact. 38 words in the original language, written 2,400 years ago by a signatory delegation that no longer existed as a political entity, a civilization that had dissolved 4 centuries after the Compact's ratification, absorbed into larger governance structures, its territorial records archived and its seat on the founding council left formally vacant and then gradually forgotten. The clause it had written had never been invoked, never cited, never tested. It had simply remained, present in every ratified charter and amendment that followed, because no one had ever removed it, and because something that is never invoked is very easy to forget is still there. Dr. Corhen had not forgotten it. She had found it in a footnote and spent 7 years making sure it meant what she thought it meant. She died before the resolution. She left her verification files to Marin, all of them, organized, cross-referenced, with notes in her own handwriting in the margins of the key documents. Small, even handwriting. The kind developed by someone who has spent decades writing in margins that were not very large. In the margin of the Subprovision 9 document, the document with 38 words that she had found in a footnote and spent 7 years verifying, she had written one note. This holds, make sure the conditions are right before you use it. Marin had read that note many times over 8 years. She had been making sure the conditions were right. The Continuance Archive had been reading the Concord's legal record for 28 years. In 28 years, they had found 7 things. Not secrets, not intercepted communications. Not the kind of intelligence that comes with a code name and a classification level and a briefing room with cleared attendees. 7 procedural facts buried in 2,400 years of the Concord's own ratified record. Each one present in the archive the Concord maintained. Each one quietly load-bearing in the legal structure the Concord operated under. Each one missed because the Concord had stopped reading its own foundation the way you stop reading the walls of a room you have lived in for 60 years. They had not stopped reading. They read the founding compact. They read the ratification annexes. They read the footnotes. All of them. The 7 findings were in Marin's folder. They had been in her folder for 6 years, added and verified and refined, waiting for the moment when using them was the right thing to do. The moment required 2 conditions. The first was that the Concord had to invoke the unanimous consent provision of the founding compact, had to make it the formal basis of the resolution, on the record, in the chamber, in front of witnesses. The second was that the conditions for Subprovision 9 had to actually exist. Founding compact signatories who were still in territorial recognition, who would be willing to abstain rather than vote, and who understood what an abstention would mean under the specific language of the provision. Both conditions had to be true at the same time. This was the 3rd resolution in 14 years. The first 2 had failed on technical grounds. The Concord had not used the unanimous consent provision. They had used other mechanisms, and those mechanisms had been challenged successfully on other grounds. Each failure had pushed the Concord toward a more fundamental approach. Each failure had made this version more likely to invoke the founding compact directly. Marin had been waiting for them to do it. They had done it this morning. 3901-3. She had set her folder on the railing and asked one question. The question was simple. Could Convener Primus Ondexerath confirm that the resolution had been ratified under the founding compact's unanimous consent provision? He could, he did. He said it the way you confirm something that does not need confirming. The verbal acknowledgement of a premise so obvious that the act of stating it is a formality. Something you do because the procedure requires a spoken record and not because there is any possibility of disagreement. Standard procedure. Marin wrote something in her notes. She wrote slowly, deliberately, in the way she always wrote in chambers, not because she needed time to think, but because the act of writing gave the room something to watch. And a room that is watching you write is a room that is waiting. And a room that is waiting is a room that has given you control of the pace. She finished writing. She looked up. Subprovision 9 of the Thesson Founding Compact, she said, requires unanimous consent from all original founding signatories currently holding territorial recognition. She said it without looking at her notes. She had not needed notes for Subprovision 9 for 6 years. Not majority, not supermajority, unanimous, all founding signatories, everyone. Ondexerath said that was correct, standard procedure. His voice had the same quality it had carried through 40 minutes of resolution reading, declarative, flat, the transmission of information without particular feeling about the information. 4 of the founding signatories abstained this morning, Marin said. The Dovisari delegation, the Korathi Assembly, the Pelivar Accord, the Menvoreth Collective, all 4 abstained. None voted against the resolution, none voted for it. A pause, a short one. Abstention is permitted, Ondexerath said. Current procedural guidelines clearly allow. Under current procedure, Marin said, yes. An abstention is a neutral act under current procedure, I agree. She turned one page in her notes. She did it without rushing. But this specific question is not governed by current procedure. It is governed by Subprovision 9. And under Subprovision 9, not current procedure, the founding compact itself, the document this resolution was ratified under, an abstention from a required unanimous signatory is not a neutral act. She let that settle. The chamber was very quiet. The particular quiet of a large room waiting to understand something it has not yet understood. The resolution required unanimity, she said. It did not receive it. It has not received it. The resolution failed its own ratification condition before it was read aloud this morning. Ondexerath's four-jointed fingers were still flat on the railing. He had not moved them since she began speaking. The abstentions were independent decisions by those delegations, he said. There is no procedural mechanism by which independent abstentions can be construed as a coordinated challenge to. They were not independent, Marin said. Her voice did not change. Over the preceding 16 months, each of the four abstaining signatories filed formal procedural correspondence with the Continuance Archive. Each delegation expressed concern about the pattern of the Concord's recent resolutions, specifically the 3 attempts in 14 years to remove humanity from recognized infrastructure through escalating procedural mechanisms. Each asked, through that correspondence, whether there was a legal channel for expressing that concern that would not require them to take a visible oppositional position in the chamber floor vote. She looked at her notes, not because she needed to, because she wanted to give the chamber a moment. I told them there was, under subprovision 9, an abstention from a required unanimous signatory is not a no. It is a structural nullification. It produces the same procedural effect as a no. The consent requirement fails without requiring a formal recorded opposition. It is quieter, it is harder to counterfile against, and it is legally identical in outcome. She looked up. They did not abstain because they opposed the Concord's position. They abstained because I asked them to through the correct procedural channel on the record 16 months ago. Because an abstention under this specific provision does what a no does without the political cost of a no. Albeit, they were not protecting us. They were protecting the compact they signed 2,400 years ago. The Convocation's legal counsel, seated at the edge of the second tier, a figure Marin had identified in the briefing files, and had been watching at the edge of her sight since the session began, leaned forward slightly. She had been waiting for this too. The lean meant a counterargument was ready. The counterargument would be retroactive procedural challenge. The vote had been recorded, the session was formally concluded. You could not retroactively apply a sub-provision interpretation to a resolution that had already been ratified under established procedure. It was not an unreasonable argument. It was, in fact, the argument Marin would have made in their position. She had spent 6 years preparing for it. She opened her folder to page 4. She did not make a production of it. She opened the folder the way you open something you have opened many times, without looking, fingers finding the right page by the slight difference in thickness where the divider sat. The document already exactly where she expected it to be because she had put it there and had not moved it. 1100 years ago, she said, the Concord ratified an exile resolution under conditions identical to this morning's. A unanimous consent provision was invoked. A founding signatory abstained. The vote was recorded. The session was concluded. She set the page on the railing, not dropped, set with 2 fingers flat. The Compact Review Tribunal declared that resolution retroactively void 43 years after it was passed, when a challenge was filed by one of the affected parties. The tribunal cited subprovision 9 directly. It ruled that the unanimous consent failure existed at the moment of the vote, not at the moment of challenge, that a void ratification does not become valid through time or through the absence of challenge, and cannot be remedied by subsequent procedural action. The species that called that vote was formally censured by the tribunal. The censure is still in the record. She tapped the page once lightly. I have a certified copy of the tribunal's finding. The filing reference is Archive Document 17 Sigma 4. It is in the Concord's own archive. It has been there for 1,100 years. She looked up. The precedent for retroactive annulment under these exact conditions is not disputed. It is settled. It was settled by the Concord's own tribunal. Ondexerath did not speak for 4 seconds. Marin counted them. Not from nerves, not from performance. She counted them the way she counted everything in chambers as data, as information about the shape of the moment she was in. 4 seconds of silence from Ondexerath, who had presided over 9 charter-level resolutions and had a reputation in the briefing files as someone who did not pause before responding, meant something specific. She had read about the amber secondary membrane in those same files. A thin translucent layer across the outer surface of the primary eye, involuntary, activated under sustained stress. The kind of stress that came not from physical threat but from the specific discomfort of a situation that did not fit the expected shape of things. The chamber knew it as his tell. In 22 years it had appeared twice. It appeared now. The membrane caught the light from the upper tiers. Amber thin, unmistakably present. He did not speak. The chamber did not fill the silence. 3,901 delegates in a 6-tiered circular room, and the room was quiet enough that Marin could hear, very faintly, the sound of her own breathing and the soft pressure of her hand resting on the railing. She waited. 4 signatory abstentions. 1 1,100-year precedent. 1 2,400-year clause. The resolution had not been invalidated this morning. It had been invalid from the moment it was filed, from the moment it was drafted with the unanimous consent provision as its ratification basis, from the moment the 4 founding signatories received her correspondence and agreed to abstain, from the moment the continuance archive sent the public filing at 400 and it was confirmed received. The Chamber had ratified a void document in front of 3,901 witnesses. Marin did not say this yet. She had it written in her notes in the margin of page 1 in her own handwriting, smaller than she usually wrote, pressed close to the edge of the page where there was barely room for it. She had written it 6 weeks ago when the session date was confirmed, when the resolution text was filed for review, and she had read it and seen the unanimous consent provision and understood that the conditions were finally exactly right. She had written it then. It was still true now. She turned to the next page. Finding 4. 31 conquered member species relied on relay infrastructure that routed through human-managed nodes. Not by design, not by treaty or negotiation or deliberate policy, by the simple physical fact of how the relay network had been built over 80 years, one segment at a time, by different contractors under different governance cycles, and the human-managed segments had ended up at the junction points, the places where routes from different regions met. The relay equivalent of a train station that a city grows around because the station was there first. You could redesign the network around different junction points. It would take time. It would require parallel infrastructure, phased transitions, coordination across 31 species' separate technical agencies. It could not be done in 90 days. The Exile resolution carried a 90-day implementation timeline. Marin set a single page on the railing. She did not explain it. She did not gesture toward it or draw attention to it or wait for Ondexerath's staff to look at it before she continued. She set it down the way you set down something whose meaning will be clear to anyone who looks. The page had 2 columns. No headers, no title, no explanatory text. On the left, species names, 31 of them in the Concord standard transliteration. On the right, numbers, not coordinates, not fleet positions. Days, the number of days from implementation before relay degradation for that species would reach critical service threshold, the point past which the degradation stops being an inconvenience and becomes something else. The smallest number on the page was 19. 11 of the numbers were smaller than the 90-day implementation window. Marin moved on. She held the next page rather than setting it down. She looked at it for a moment, the particular look of someone confirming that what they are about to say is exactly what the document says, no more and no less, and then she looked up. Corridor 7, she said. The resolution cites Corridor 7 as its third evidentiary basis. Unauthorized human fleet movement in a contested transit zone, persistent failure to seek governing body approval for transit operations within the zone. She kept her voice level. She kept her voice level the way she kept it level for everything in a chamber, not because the words required it, but because deviation from level told the room something, and she was not ready yet to tell the room anything it was not already processing. Corridor 7 was assigned to Earth under a bilateral transit agreement. The agreement was co-signed by the Concord's own Trade Bureau. It was never rescinded. It was never amended, never suspended, never formally reviewed for modification. It was filed in the Concord Archive in year 6 of the Continuance Archives operation under Filing Reference Archive Document 44 Theta 29. She read the reference number at the pace of someone who understands that anyone in the chamber with terminal access is looking it up right now. The agreement is still there. It has been there since year 6. The corridor was not taken. It was given, under a signed bilateral agreement that the Concord's own Trade Bureau co-executed. She set the page on the railing. You cited a corridor you gave us as evidence we had taken something. No one spoke. Ondexerath had not spoken since the precedent. His amber membrane had not retracted. The legal counsel at the edge of the second tier had stopped consulting the flat surface entirely. They were very still, the stillness that comes not from patience, but from the particular condition of having your next move removed from you, one by one in sequence, until you are standing in a room where no move remains. Marin gave the chamber a moment. She was good at giving chambers moments. It was a skill she had developed slowly over many years by watching what happened when you did not give a chamber a moment. When you moved too fast, stacked finding on finding without space, gave the room no time to feel the weight of each one before the next arrived. When you did that, the findings blurred. They became a quantity rather than a sequence. And what she needed them to be today was a sequence, each one landing separately in the silence the previous one had cleared. She gave the chamber its moment. Then she reached into the folder and took out 2 pages. She held them for a second, not performing, not building tension, just checking, the same quiet confirmation she had done with every page today. Then she set them on the railing. Side by side, Earth submitted full biomass census data to the Concord's biological registry 7 years ago. This is stated in the resolution as the fourth evidentiary basis, a persistent refusal to provide required biological transparency data, a pattern of deliberate noncompliance with Concord biological registry requirements. She pointed to the page on the left. That is the submission receipt, date stamped, protocol confirmed, accepted into the registry's filing system on the day of submission. The data was submitted in full in the correct format through the correct channel. She pointed to the page on the right. That is the registry's dissolution notice. The biological registry was dissolved the following year quietly, without public announcement, as an internal Concord administrative decision. The data that had been submitted was never processed. It was not rejected. It was not flagged. It was simply never processed because the body responsible for processing it was dissolved before the processing cycle completed. She did not add anything. The 2 pages sat on the railing side by side. The submission receipt and the dissolution notice, in the pale light from the upper tiers, in front of 3,901 delegates who could see them and read them and follow the logic from one page to the other without any assistance from her. The Concord had not refused the data. They had dissolved the institution that received it, and then written the resulting gap in the record as evidence of deliberate noncompliance, and then built that evidence into a resolution that had just been ratified in this chamber, aloud, in front of witnesses. The math was not complicated. The math was complete. This was the moment Marin had thought about most in the months before today, not the facts which she had known for years, but what it would feel like to set those 2 pages down and watch the chamber do the math. It felt like nothing in particular. That surprised her slightly. She had expected something. Satisfaction or relief or the specific feeling of a thing you have been waiting a long time to do finally being done. She had been carrying Dr. Corhen's work for 8 years. She had been carrying the folder for 6. She had been waiting for the conditions to be right, and the conditions had been right since 400 this morning when the public filing was confirmed received, and she had walked into this chamber and sat on Tier 5 and waited through 40 minutes of resolution reading, and now the 2 pages were on the railing and the chamber was doing the math. What she felt mostly was the weight of the folder in her hands. That was all. She closed it. She did not look up immediately. She looked at the cover of the folder, plain, slightly worn at the spine, the kind of worn that comes from being held in the same way in the same hand for a long time. She had carried this particular folder for 6 years. Before that, a different folder, same wear pattern, same position in her hand. Before that, another one. The ventilation hum in the archive had a particular quality in the early morning, before the full staff arrived, when the sublevel was quiet enough to hear the system working. She had spent many early mornings in the archive. She was thinking about that hum now, standing on Tier 5 of the Accord Convocation in a chamber that smelled like pressed stone and recycled air. She thought about Director Ondrath's index tabs. She thought about Dr. Kareth's 2-finger tabs. She thought about Tavan Sorvan receiving a copy of the public filing that morning with no message attached at his home, 2 years after his retirement. She thought about Dr. Corhen's handwriting in the margin. This holds. Make sure the conditions are right. The conditions had been right since year 14 of the program, when the third exclusion attempt began to take shape and the unanimous consent angle became clear. She had waited 4 more years, making sure the 4 founding signatories were correctly identified and correctly approached, making sure the correspondence was on the record in the right channels, making sure the 1,100-year precedent was certified and the public filing was prepared and the transmission was confirmed. 8 years of waiting, on top of Dr. Corhen's 11 years of finding and verifying. 19 years in this particular room, some version of it from the inside. She looked up. Her voice did not change register. As of 400 this morning, she said, 4 hours before this session opened, certified copies of the complete legal record were transmitted. She spoke at the pace of something being set into the permanent record, which is what it was. To the compact independent archive, to the historical commissions of all 4 abstaining founding signatories, to 14 press organizations operating across 9 species territories. She let each destination sit for a moment before the next one arrived. The transmission is confirmed received. It is public. It has been public since before you read the resolution aloud this morning. The chamber was silent. She counted the seconds the way she had counted the 4 seconds after the precedent as data, as the shape of the moment. 14 seconds. The chamber did not fill them. Ondexerath's amber membrane had been present since the precedent. It was still present. It had not retracted once in the time since she had set the 1,100-year document on the railing, through 3 more findings, through the 2 pages set side by side, through the 14 seconds of silence that followed the public record announcement. In 22 years of charter-level resolutions, it had appeared twice. She had now caused it to appear for longer than both previous occasions combined. She did not take particular satisfaction in this, it was simply data. She reached into the folder. Not for a page. For the thing that was not part of the record. A small card, plain, not laminated, not sealed against anything. Folded once, pressed flat, the kind of fold that becomes a crease over time. She had carried one like it since her 3rd year in the program. She had never explained what it said. In 19 years of chambers and transit corridors and sublevel early mornings, no one had ever asked. She held it for a moment. The weight of it was almost nothing. Paper was almost nothing. But she had been carrying this particular card for 6 years, this one, this fold, this crease, and it had a presence in her hand that was not about weight. She did not open it. She set it carefully inside the back cover of the folder, the place she always kept it. She closed the folder. She picked up her pen and capped it, the small, clean sound of a cap meeting a pen body, the sound of something being finished. She looked at Exile. You offered us 4 minutes as a courtesy, she said. We used 3.5, the rest is yours. The chamber was silent for a long time. Not the silence of a room waiting for the next thing. The silence of a room that has received something it does not yet have a category for. They had come to witness a resolution, a conclusion, the 3rd attempt in 14 years, and this one was supposed to hold the right provision, the right margin, the right procedural basis. 4 minutes of courtesy and a door closing. They had witnessed a void document being ratified in front of witnesses. They had watched it be shown to them, not argued, not contested, not framed as opposition, shown in sequence using their own archive, citing their own precedent, in a language every legal interpreter in the chamber could parse without assistance. It was public, it had been public since before they arrived. 3,901 people were very still. The chamber began to empty the way large rooms empty when no one wants to be seen leaving. Not a crowd exiting, not a session being formally closed, not an announcement or a dismissal. Just a gradual thinning. A species at a time, a tier at a time, quietly, without declaration, until the pale composite stone was bare and the light from the upper tiers fell on empty seats and the recycled air had no one left to breathe it. Exil's legal staff filed a procedural challenge before the day's end. The challenge went to the Compact Review Tribunal. It argued, as Marin had expected, that the Subprovision 9 interpretation had been applied retroactively to a resolution ratified under established current procedure guidelines, and that retroactive procedural reinterpretation could not invalidate a formally concluded session. The tribunal issued its first finding 31 hours later. The finding cited archive document 17 Sigma 4, the one Marin had placed on the railing. The challenge was denied, the tribunal's language was brief, the precedent was settled, the void existed at the moment of the vote. Time and the absence of prior challenge did not remedy a void ratification. The challenge was denied. That evening, Marin was in the unmarked passage behind the chamber's east wall. She was waiting for a transit pod. She was not doing anything else, not reviewing notes, not sending messages, not going over what had happened in the chamber or preparing for what would come next. She was standing in a corridor with plain composite walls and holding her folder under her arm and looking at the far end of the passage, where the light was slightly different from the rest. She heard slow, deliberate steps. The Dovisari elder was small, dust-brown, four-eyed, a pace that had the quality of someone who measured each step before placing it, not from physical difficulty, but from a culture that considered deliberate movement a form of respect for the space you were moving through. She was the senior representative of the oldest founding compact signatory still in territorial existence, and she had spent the session in the gallery tier of the chamber, in the observer seat assigned to non-voting delegations, watching. She stopped beside Marin. She looked at the far end of the corridor for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "How long was the program running?" 28 years, Marin said. A pause. Who found the clause? Marin looked at the walls. Dr. Vale Corhin. She was a treaty archaeologist on the program, year 4. She found Subprovision 9 in a footnote to a ratification amendment, not the body of the founding compact, not the annexes, a footnote. She spent the next 7 years building the verification chain that proved it was enforceable. She called it the floor, she paused. She died before the resolution 9 years before. The elder was quiet. The transit pod had not arrived yet. Outside the passage, somewhere above them, the chamber they had both spent the day in was empty. The light still fell from the upper tiers. The air was still recycled. The pale composite railing still held the impressions faintly of a folder set flat upon it and pages placed with 2 fingers and a certified copy that was still there because no one had moved it. She knew what she had found, the elder said. Her voice was low and even, built for careful speech. She simply understood that finding it was the work, not the using of it. Marin did not answer immediately. She thought about the small, even handwriting in the margin. She thought about the ventilation hum and the index tabs and the two finger taps and the binders arranged by year, and the 14,000 pages cross-referenced over 19 years by someone who had retired 2 years before today and received a copy of the filing this morning with no message attached. She thought about the fold in the card in the back of her folder. Finding it was the work. She had understood that too, eventually. Not in year 4, not when she first inherited the verification files and read the note in the margin, but gradually, over years, as she learned what it meant to carry something across time and know that the carrying was the most important part, more important than the moment of use, which would come or not come depending on conditions you could prepare for but not control. The carrying was the fidelity. The carrying was how the work survived the people who did it. Yes, she said, that's what she understood. She found out later that Ondixerath had asked his legal staff the same question the elder had asked her. His staff had not known. They had gone to the archive to find out, the Concord's archive, their own record, the same place the Continuance archive had been reading for 28 years. And they had found the answer, and they had brought it to him. Year 4, a footnote. A researcher who had spent 7 years verifying a 38-word clause and then died 9 years before it was used. He had asked to speak with Marin directly. She told him what she had told the elder. He asked how long she had been carrying it. She thought about Dr. Corhin's handwriting. She thought about the crease in the card she had not opened. Long enough, she said, that we stopped being afraid of the answer. The resolution 3901-3, 40 minutes of reading, 3 procedural citations and a courtesy of 4 minutes, was formally annulled 48 hours after the session. No fleet movement, no emergency protocols. No countermeasure that changed the public record or moved it from the 14 press organizations and the historical commissions and the independent archive where it had been sitting since 400 on the morning of the session. The 4 abstaining signatories submitted a joint procedural statement. It outlined, in detail, their concerns about the pattern of the Concord's resolutions over the preceding 14 years, and it called for a formal review of the Concord's use of the unanimous consent provision across that period. The statement would take 4 years to fully process. The Concord's legal staff began a review of every resolution passed under unanimous consent provisions in the last 60 years. They had a great deal of reading ahead of them. They had spent 60 years building on a foundation they had stopped reading. Archivist Tavin Sorvan received a certified copy of the annulment filing at his home. The envelope had his name on it in the standard filing font. No message inside, no cover note, nothing to explain what it was or why it had been sent to him. Just the filing. He read it. He set it on the table in front of him, next to his morning coffee which had gone slightly cold, and he sat with it for a while. He had spent 19 years in the sublevel facility in Nairobi. He had cross-referenced 14,000 pages of pre-Concord Galactic legal record. He had retired 2 years ago and he had received a copy of the public filing that morning with no message, and now he had received the annulment, and he understood what both of them meant without needing it explained because he had the context, because 19 years of reading gave you the context for most things. And some things you understand not from being told, but from having done the work that makes the telling unnecessary. He picked up his coffee. Director Hess Ondrath sent one message. He sent it to all 190 current members of the Continuance Archive and to 23 former members, and to the next of kin contacts for 6 people who had worked in the building on the side street for years and had not lived to see this particular morning. He had never sent a message longer than 1 sentence. He did not break that record now. 4 words. Dr. Corhin's clause held. In the sublevel facility, the message arrived at 6:17 local time. The ventilation was running, as it had been running for 28 years. The binders were on the shelf with their handwritten index tabs. The desk in the corner where Dr. Corhin had taped a footnote to the wall above her workspace 31 years ago was occupied now by someone else. A treaty archaeologist in her 6th year, who read the forward message on her screen and then looked at the wall above her desk where she had taped her own documents and was quiet for a moment. The team read it. They knew what it meant. No one said anything for a while. The ventilation ran. The building had no sign on it. Outside, the side street was beginning to get the first light of the morning, and in Nairobi the day was starting, and in a building that most of the city did not know existed, 190 people sat with 4 words and the 28 years behind them.